Okay, guys, so last time we were together, we were looking at the marriage ceremony at the mountain when Yah came down and gave the Esra Devarim, the 10 words, the 10 commandments, if you will. That was a spectacular discussion. I love discussing that with you guys. It was great fun and very informative and instructive. Now, the next thing that we're going to be talking about this evening is what I think it was Cal Thomas who used to say, and that's the rest of the story. Do you remember that guy? He was all right. Because we're going to hear the additional commands that take us through Mishpatim and Teruma. We're also going to be looking a little bit about authority in the spiritual congregation, and then Teruma is where they start to build the tabernacle and the accoutrements therein, the menorah, the table of showbread, the Ark of the Covenant, all of the coverings, and start building this tabernacle. That is a fascinating discussion, which unfortunately we probably won't have time to get to this evening, but I encourage you to continue to study. You know, it's interesting that more scripture is dedicated to the command regarding building the tabernacle than just about anything anywhere. And yet we read it and it's mysterious to us and we're not quite sure what to make of it. Why would I need to know about the dimensions of this box and what's inside of it? And it seems rather mysterious to us, but I really encourage you to dig into that because it's absolutely astonishing once you get below the surface of just looking at box measurements and stuff. So take a look at that. The preliminary remarks that I want to make regarding our study of this particular passage in Mishpatim, these are the instructions that are a direct follow-on from the 10 commandments that were given by the mouth of Yah at Mt Sinai. And we can tell because the first words of this portion are Ve'ele ha-mishpatim, which means, and these are the judgments. So there's an and there by the vav that's attached to the beginning of ele. And these are the judgments. So remember that when Father came down on the mountain and said, thou shalt not do this and that and the other thing, the people did what? When they heard, I want to remind you that this was a powerful experience where they're hearing tremendous sounds that are inexplicable. They can hear the voice of Father coming from above, below, left, right, behind them, inside their own heads. That's very disconcerting. And they said to Moshe, what? Stop him from talking, we're all going to die. You go up and get the rest of the message, and we'll hear. We'll do and we'll hear everything you say. So Father stopped talking. And then Moshe continues because he got the rest of the story. He got the rest of the instructions from Elohim, and that's why it says, and these are the judgments. So this is a follow-on. If you could have withstood Father speaking from the mountain, this is what he would have continued to say. So I want you to remember, this is really powerful stuff. Now, the important part of this is these words really reveal the heart of our God. If you want to know our Father, chapter 20, when he starts speaking from the mountain, ending in chapter 24, is the heart of what our Father thinks and feels and how he feels about people and servants and how we should treat one another. It's all right there in a package. Now, incidentally, I know that many of you understand this, that when you get to the book of Leviticus, you have a holiness code. I like to look at the book of Exodus, especially in this part. Most people get done with God talking from the mountain and the adventure going in the wilderness and leaving slavery, and they think, well, now he's going to start giving us a bunch of instructions. When's the story going to kick up again? They kind of they get bogged down in just thinking this is a narrative story. It's not. This is the important stuff. Okay? And here's what I like to tell you. You remember that I believe it was the Apostle Paul said at one point in his writings that the Torah was not made for a righteous individual. The Torah is made for a lawless individual. And you can see that in a lot of cases, okay? I think the Torah is life. It gives you the instructions for life. But a lot of it, and if you've read it, you know, you look at it and you go, well, it's just kind of common sense, isn't it, Alan? You shouldn't kill people and murder and rape and pillage. Yeah, a lot of it is that. If you're looking at it on its very face level, call switched to another device. Someone, I think someone tried to log me into sorry about that. I think someone tried to log in.
Looks like you're on mute.
Oops, hold on. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm on the Verizon network, thank you. Now, I think that someone tried to log in as me to this meeting. I'm guessing it was Angela. If you see her, throw rocks at her. But she said it was her. It was her. All right, so here's the interesting part, okay? These instructions encompass what it means to live in a civil, normal, justice-oriented society. And when you get to the book of Leviticus, this is basically the instructions that say, you want to really be a member of my family? You want to be a part of the inner circle? You want to be a part of what I'm doing? Close. You want to draw near to me? You want to get close to me? Here's the instructions for you. You want to not get destroyed by me? This is what we're talking about tonight. See what I'm saying? I like to think about these commandments in that way. This book of Exodus, when it starts giving us commands, says, you want to keep from being destroyed and destroying yourself? Do these things. The book of Leviticus says, you want to draw close to me? Do these things. This is for a peculiar people in the book of Leviticus. These instructions that we're reading tonight are for preventing you from dying and having a horrible, miserable life. Fair enough? Now, the interesting thing is that have you ever seen, and I know that this is common for all of us, whenever you're watching a TV show or a movie or you've read a book and there's a terrible, terrible injustice that happens, like the poor are downtrodden, a movie about slavery, a movie about widows and orphans being taken advantage of, just some kind of like a road gang that's like, you know, raping and torturing and killing people who are just happening to travel from A to B, you know what I'm saying? You've seen this, and there's nothing that grabs at your soul more than that. When you see a profound injustice, it's horrifying and it's tragic, and it makes us really feel strongly about that. But I want to remind you that that's nothing compared to what our Father feels, because He feels very much like that when we mistreat each other. Now remember, these are the commandments that tell us how to love our neighbor as ourselves. Well, let's start by not killing them, okay? Raping and pillaging and breaking their stuff, to stealing from them. How about we start there? And then we can learn how to actually actively love one another. I would give you an example. You know that Paul talked about one of these commandments, but he gave a bit of a new and an interesting interpretation. And from the book of Deuteronomy, there is a command that says, you shall not muzzle an ox while it is threshing grain, right? Now, Paul interpreted that in a totally new and different way, didn't he? Do you remember what he said? He said,
Provide, basically?
Right, yeah. He said, right, he said, Paul said, is God altogether concerned for oxen? No, of course he's concerned for animals too. The point that Paul was making is, if someone is serving you as a gospel minister, a pastor, a teacher, an elder, they should be able to count on your support. Now, do not think that I am telling you I want your money. We have never collected money in this fellowship, and I do not need your money. Don't send us money. There's a button on our website that says, do not send us money. So don't send money. But Paul is reinterpreting this Torah command at a deeper level. And he tells you, God is not that concerned for oxen. Of course he is, but what he is concerned with is if an ox should have the right, as it's going around the grain mill, round and round and round, it should have the right to bend down and eat some of the grain that it is grinding out. In the same way, a minister of the gospel, a servant of the Lord, should have the ability to be cared for by the congregation that he or she is serving. So Paul is interpreting these commands at a deeper level. That's the challenge that we all face as we are reading these seemingly basic commands that seem to us to be nothing more than just common sense, common decency. But don't think about it that way. When you're seeing it that way, you're seeing just the surface level. We need to go a little bit deeper. And we'll try to do that in a couple of instances tonight so that you can get a sense for what I mean by that. Now, these Mishpatim, these judgments, are a framework for our freedom. To the world at this time in the book of Exodus, they are pretty revolutionary. You can compare these judgments of God to the Code of Hammurabi, for example, which predate Moses by just a little bit, not a whole lot. So these instructions that our Father is giving his people are revolutionary in that day and age. The tremendous amount of freedom and justice and love that is being displayed in these commandments is astonishing for that day and age. To us, though, what do you think? We're rather libertine in our judgments. We are a nation of rebels. We started as rebels, and rightly so. We threw off the yoke of our oppressors under the British Empire. However, many of us have experienced such tremendous freedom that when someone tries to put some code on you like this, you might chafe at it a little bit and say, that's taking away my freedom. Well, when you're accustomed to the kind of freedom that we have, which is oftentimes the right to do evil, these can feel somewhat restrictive, but they're not. They're actually very freeing, okay? I think that our society, and if I might talk about that for just a moment, our society has become so enamored of rights that we have lost any sense of responsibility. Okay, we don't have responsibility, we have rights. So many of them ill-deserved that we don't remember that all of these rights come with responsibilities. And so we're not very good at exercising the responsibilities that come with these rights. So we can kind of chafe at these instructions a little bit. Now, one more word before we get started doing a little bit of reading. The Torah system of equity and justice is very straightforward and very simple. It's very simple and yet very elegant. There is basically 3 categories of guardrails, if you will. There are payments, meaning you steal somebody's stuff, you got to pay it back. Okay? You've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth and wound for wound and bruise for bruise. We all know, I hope that we know, that that is not saying if you accidentally poke my eye out with something that they got to hold me down in the court and poke out my eye. Okay, how does that help you? It doesn't, okay? What that is telling us is that's called tort law. Okay, personal injury attorneys, that's where they came from, okay? Where if I poke out your eye, the court is going to have to figure out how much is her eye worth in a monetary figure. I have to pay her for her loss of time, for her healing, for the ability that she may not be able to work as well as she used to now that she's only got one eye, okay? So this is monetary payment. That's what it means when it says eye for eye, tooth for tooth, burn for burn, wound for wound. So we have cash payments, recompense being paid. That's one category. Second category, and it's only mentioned once, is scourging. You remember that Paul was lashed how many times? 40 minus 1, a couple of different occasions, because the Torah says if this person, this is a special case, and it's only mentioned once, that a person can be scourged. And it says you may not wipe him more than 40 times or you'll degrade your brother in your eyes. So that's why the rabbis ruled Never whip somebody 40 times. Keep it 39. That's why Paul said 39 lashes. Yeah.
The Romans didn't go with that whole.
Yeah, the Romans didn't care whether they were degrading their citizens. So when the rabbis meted out justice through the court of the Sanhedrin, they would not whip anybody 40 times. They always stopped at 39. But there's that, and then there's death. That's it. You pay, you get flogged, or you die. Those are the three categories of punishment for breaking any of these laws. So we have personal injury, manslaughter, and property damage. Generally speaking, you make a payment. You recompense your brother, your community member. Civil and ecclesiastical rebellion may get you a flogging. And murder and the violation of certain moral purity laws, death. I want you to remember there is no such thing as a prison per se as we know it in our culture. They have prisons. You can see them in Acts when Peter and James or Peter and John got removed from prison. That's a holding cell. That's like the local county jail where they keep you until you get a court date. Or they throw you back in there while you're awaiting sentencing. They don't put people in jail and keep them there for years and years and years. That does not happen. Unless you're a political prisoner in Rome, that will happen. But in the Torah, they get justice as quickly as possible. They're not going to throw you in prison and take care of you for the rest of your life. How's that fair? That ain't justice. That's not justice. So, there are my preliminary remarks regarding this Torah portion of Mishpatim. Now let's open up our Bibles and read a little bit and get some examples here. So I'm going to start in chapter 21. I'm going to share my screen with you so that we can see the same passage. I think I'm reading from the New American Standard or the Holman Christian Standard Bible. I don't remember which, but I'll show it with you. So here's what we got. In Exodus 21, starting in verse 2, it says, when you buy a Hebrew slave, he is to serve for 6 years. Then in the 7th, he is to leave as a free man without paying anything. If he arrives alone, he is to leave alone. If he arrives with a wife, his wife is to leave with him. If his master gives him a wife and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children belong to her master, and the man must leave alone. But if the slave declares, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I do not want to leave as a free man, his master is to bring him to the judges and then bring him to the door or doorpost. His master must pierce his ear with an awl, and he will serve his master for life. Now, does anybody know what that word for doorpost is? No. Good guess, though. What are those little things that you hang outside your door? That's the Hebrew word mezuzah right there. It literally means doorpost. Okay, so interesting thing here. Now, you read about in the Torah slaves, when you buy a Hebrew slave. Now, if you've studied this at all, you recognize that most of us in America, we think about slavery and we're thinking about something completely different than is written in the Bible. Okay? Does anybody know what the penalty is for kidnapping a person in the Torah? Death. So you can't just snatch somebody up and sell them as a slave. If you are caught doing that or with a snatched, kidnapped person in your possession, you will die. So a lot of unbelievers can read their Bible in the English, not quite understanding what they're reading, and say, well, see, the Bible advocates slavery. No, it doesn't, okay? If you will, that's why we are called Hebrew roots people. We are trying to figure out what is the cultural, historical relevance of what is being said here. Don't just read it in the English and apply your own culture that you live in and think you know what it's talking about. That is foolishness. Okay, so what we are talking about is a person who has had a judgment placed against him by the court. Let's say that he was a poor man and he went and he stole an ox and he was going to sell it on the black market to make some money. Well, he's got no money to begin with, and an ox is a very, very expensive creature. When he gets caught, how much does he have to pay back?
I think it's 5.
5 oxen. Okay? How's he going to pay that back? He ain't got no money to begin with. He's going to be sold to a wealthy person as a servant. Or he has a tremendous amount of debt that he can't pay back. And his debt collectors are demanding that he pay them. He is going to have to go and borrow money from someone and work for them. So when you read slavery here, don't read slavery. This is indentured servitude. It's like a person who is they're selling themselves. In fact, many of the colonists who came to America were indentured servants. They had to actually agree with the shipping company that they were catching a ride over here to say, give us passage to America on your boat and take care of us on the month or 2 long journey that it takes to get there, and we'll work at the colony, the plantation, for so many years to pay you back for our passage. That's indentured servitude. That's exactly what's happening here. And you know, when you do sell yourself to some wealthier person who can loan you the money to pay off your debts or pay your civil fine, you're only allowed to serve that person for how long? In the 6 years, essentially. In the 7th year, you're going free. And also, remember the Yovel, the Jubilee year. I was talking about this with my wife just the other day as we were going on a walk, and I said, could you imagine if in America every family had a plot of land, and no matter what, they got it back? If they sold it, if they leased it, anything that happened to them, in the 50th year, they got it all back, free and clear. That's like a tremendous amount of hope that would be reinstilled into every family, every generation. Every single generation would have all their debts wiped out, and any land that that their family or clan used to own is given back to them. You cannot own property in Israel, period. It's all owned by God. He leases it to the family who owns it. And if they are broke or poor or whatever, they can say, I will lease this property to you for an amount of crops that are going to be planted on this thing for the next so many years. Give me a chunk of money. Now you can get that money. If you can pay it back, you can pay it back and get your land back. Or you can wait until the 50th year and you get all of your land back. You don't owe anything. Imagine what that would be like if America operated that way. Every family had land and you could not lose it past the 50th year. Every 50th year, it just resets to the family who originally owned it. That would be astonishing. Astonishing. Jerry, did you want to say something? Don't say it out loud. Give him a microphone. Here comes Jerry, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody say hi to Jerry. Jerry, what's up?
Not much. I may be wrong on this, but I thought that if they sold land out in the country, they get it back on the year of Jubilee. But if they sold land in the city, they didn't get it back on the year of Jubilee.
That is correct. Thank you. Yeah, that's a good distinction. Thank you for bringing that up. Jerry is absolutely correct, to my understanding, is that if you own a property in the city, just a house and a little small plot of land, that is not redeemable. And the property from outside the city wall to 1,000 yards is operated by the Levitical priests. Those guys keep it in perpetuity. They don't sell it at all. So they're not allowed to sell it at all. It always stays with the Levitical order. So these judgments are just astonishing in regards to their freedom and the love that you can see that our Father has, especially for the lowest members of society. That one of the first words out of his mouth when he's done speaking the 10 Commandments, and I like to think of the 10 Commandments as the preamble to the Constitution, so to speak. He's saying, let me give you 10 broad principles, and now I'll give you the rest of the story. I'll fill in the gaps, fill in some details, make you understand those a little bit more. So one of the first things out of his mouth is how to treat a slave, a person who is poor, who needed to sell himself to someone else to pay his debts. How you must treat him. That's a powerful a powerful thing that lets us know where the heart of our Father is. Now, also remember that while he may serve for 6 years, what must this master do when he sets him free in the 7th year? It actually says in Deuteronomy that when this servant is set free, his master must send him away with a liberal helping, a liberal gift to send him on his way. He's not bringing him in poor, saying, I'm going to pay your debts, but you're going to work for me for 6 years, and when your time is over, I'm kicking you out. You're gone. See you later. Well, he'd be right back in the same position that he was before. Okay, but the master is told, when you remit this slave and give him his freedom, you have to furnish him liberally from your crops, from your field, from your vine press, whatever you give him a good gift to send him on his way. This is righteousness. This is righteousness. Now, consider this most interesting thing here, where it says in verse 5, but if the servant says, I love my master and this wife and children that he's given me. Now, I know that this feels a little bit weird because you're saying to yourself, I know I did for a long time, wait a minute, the master gives him a wife and he has children with her, but when he leaves, he's not allowed to take the girl with him? Don't stumble over that. In fact, I would say this. There are certain commands in these sections that might seem weird to us, that are inexplicable, might even seem counterintuitive in some way. I will tell you this, any time that I have actually encountered that feeling as I'm reading this, I just didn't understand. I didn't understand what was happening. Like this section where I'm thinking about slaves. Does God condone slavery? Nope. I didn't understand what the word meant. I didn't understand what the cultural context was. So if you're coming across a passage and you don't understand it, it seems wrong to you in some way, consider two things. Number one, God said it, so it has to be right. I have always said to you, God doesn't say things because they're right. Whatever God says is right, period. Okay? Because when you say it the other way, it makes it sound like there's some arbitrary judge out there that is not God. No, it's whatever he does and says is righteousness. Okay? So, that's number one. Number two, consider that to be, if it's something you can do, just do it. Do you notice that when the Hebrews said to God, stop talking, and whatever, Moses, you tell us the rest, we will do and we will hear. You notice that they said that backwards? Normally we would say, I'll hear and then I'll do. No, they said, I will do and then I will hear. What do you think what do you think that might mean?
Gain understanding after doing it.
Yes, 100%. I personally think that the Sabbath day is a really good example of that. You might be looking at some of the constructions about Sabbath. You might be looking at, what does the rabbinic world say about how you're supposed to observe Sabbath, and you might say, I just don't get it. I personally think, and this happened for me, and it's happened for a lot of you that I've spoken to, you can't actually understand the Sabbath from looking outside. It only makes sense once you get into it and you look around. Ah, I see what's happening here. You look, once you have skin in the game and once you see what's happening, it makes sense. But when you're looking at it from outside, and you're saying, I got a problem with that. I don't understand it. But once you actually do it, you gain an understanding. So, in regards to these commands, I say two things. God gave the command, it's absolutely right. And number two, you probably just don't understand it yet. If it applies to you and you can apply it in your life, do it. It will make sense. You just have to trust him. He knows what he's doing. So, here's something interesting that I want to bring your attention to, and I know that you probably already know this, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. Notice this most unusual thing here where it says in verse 5, but I love my master and my wife and my children. I do not want to leave. I don't want to be a free man. I want to attach myself to my master's house permanently. This is an interesting thing because it says that his master is supposed to take him to the judges and then bring him to the door and the door post, and his master must pierce his ear with an awl, and he will then serve his master for life. Now, is this ringing a bell with you in any way? Is this kind of hinting at something else that maybe is it making you think of something else? Or is it just me? I want you to think, go ahead.
Yeshua's a door.
Yeshua is a door. He describes himself as a door. That's an interesting thing, and I hold that in your mind for a second. Okay? What else? Anything else? I want you to just play that out in your mind for a second, okay? His master takes him to the door and pops a hole in his ear and presumably puts an earring in it. When you wear an earring, you become a servant for life, okay? So, what's on the door now? A spot of blood. Have we heard about blood on a doorway before? At the Passover. At the Passover, there was blood on the door. And consider that he noticed that he says, wait a minute, I got a wife and children here. I don't want to leave my wife and children. But that's not what he says. He says, but I love my master and my wife and my children. His master is listed first. That's interesting. Okay, so he does not want to leave his master. His master has given him things, has given him wonderful gifts, and also he has now got a spot of blood on the door. Well, that speaks of redemption and salvation from slavery. In fact, it is presumed by reading the Talmud and the Mishnah regarding this passage that this man is no longer a slave. He is a member of the master's household. He's like a family member. So he's no longer a slave. He's no longer a servant. He has been engrafted into the master's household by a blood spot on the door. Okay, so you see, you can look at these seemingly rather strange and simple instructions, and you can see deeper spiritual things if you just slow down and ask yourself some questions. What's happening here? What is happening here? This doesn't quite make sense to me. Now, I want to share something else with you. Here's our next little passage. This is from Exodus 22. I'm jumping ahead to the next chapter, chapter 22 and verse 28. Here's what it says. This is just verse 28. It says, you must not blaspheme. Some of your translations may say the gods, or curse a leader among your people. So I looked at like a bunch of different translations, and literally 3 or 4 or 5 of them said, you must not blaspheme the gods or curse a leader among your people. Well, that's a little bit unusual, because in most places God says there's no such thing as any other God beside for me, and you don't even talk about these gods. And it would seem weird if Father was saying, don't blaspheme the gods. I was like, what? That's a little strange. But until you look at the actual literal rendering of this passage, and I put it for you in Hebrew and English here, it says Elohim. That can be translated as God, gods, or judges. Which of those makes the most sense? Do not revile the judges or the prince, the nasi of your people. This makes a lot more sense when you say, judges, not, lo, tekalel, revile. Do not revile the judges. Venasi, the prince, ve'amecha, of your people, lo, not, taor, curse. The judges do not revile. The prince of the people do not curse. Okay? This is a literal Hebrew translation. So it's not saying don't curse the gods. It's saying do not curse or revile the judges or the leader, the prince, the king. This is a really, really powerful thing. And unfortunately, we have been, how am I going to phrase this? We are a lawless group of people in a lot of ways. You know that we, for many, many years as Christians, most of us, were, how do you say in Greek? Anomia, lawless. How many times do you read that in your New Testament? Lawless. Get away from me, you who practice lawlessness. And of course, we're looking at it from a Western democratic culture saying, well, lawless people are people who don't obey the law. They're people who are out there busting windows and rioting in the streets and blowing up stuff. No, these are Torahless individuals, people who do not obey God's laws, okay? So, of course, violating the civil laws around you is not a great idea, but more importantly, do not violate God's laws. So, we were under the authority of the Pope for almost 1,500 years. That is a long, long time that the papacy ruled Christianity with an iron fist, with great injustice. You question them in any way, shape, or form, they kill you. Period. Okay? Now, we break away, the Protestants do, and they set up their own little bunches and bunches of different sects. And in the beginning, these different sects had some kind of ruling authority, an ecclesiastical structure of some kind that had to read the commands of God and say, this is what this means, here's how we're going to work this out, this is what this means, this is how we're going to do this. That's what everybody has to do. You know, if you've been looking at the Hebrew roots for any length of time, that that's exactly what the Talmud and the Mishnah and the Tosefta are. These are rulings by the rabbis, meaning how do we interpret this? What does it mean? Now, this is where things get a little dicey, okay? Because Father, if you look in Numbers 12, for example, you're going to see Aaron and Miriam rebel against Moses. That does not go well. Okay? You're going to look in Numbers 15, just a couple chapters later, and you're going to see Korah and his clan rebelling against Moses and Aaron. That does not go well at all. The earth opens up and swallows them all alive. They go down to Sheol alive. Okay? In Acts 23, for example, Paul submits to the high priest, even though he's an unrighteous high priest, presumably. Right? These New Testament high priests didn't have a great reputation. So when Paul says, God will strike you, you whitewashed tomb, and they smack him on the mouth and say, do you talk to the high priest like that? And I'm sorry, brothers, I had no idea that guy was the high priest. The Torah does say, do not speak ill. He's quoting this passage right here. Okay, so Paul recognized authority, and this was an unrighteous individual. Okay, now, Father treats rebellion against lawful authority figures with the death penalty. Father treats rebellion against lawful authority as a death penalty case. Let that sink in. Okay? In today's world, in Christianity especially, we're all doing what is right in our own eyes. You heard that phrase before? Where's that from?
Judges.
The book of Judges. It was a horrible travesty of justice over and over and over for almost 400 years, the period of the Judges was. That everybody would do what was right in their own eyes. They would screw things up. Things would go horribly off the rails, and then Father would send them a judge to get things back on track. They would say, oh, yeah, okay, we got it now. And then they would go do whatever was right in their own eyes, and they'd go right off the rails. This is an endless cycle, just continuously going around and around, where everybody's doing what's right in his own eyes. And unfortunately, you guys, that's what we're doing today. You know why? Because we have no authority over us. Now, please again, do not misinterpret me. I am not exercising authority over you. I am very conscientious about what I say from up here. I figure the best I can do to keep myself out of trouble and you too is to read this text and just explain it to you as best I can. That's a tough job to do though, because I have to try to get you guys and anybody who will listen to me to take God's commandments seriously. That's the job that I have, is to say, guys, read this thing. Because you know how hard it is to find a church where they actually read the Word of God to you and explain to you what it means? Do you know? Have you been to church in the last 20 or 30 years? I have. It's very hard to find a church that will actually explain the text to you. Just read it to you and explain it to you so you can understand it, so you can apply it to your life. That's a hard thing to find. That's a very hard thing to find. They're much more likely to give you a wonderful concert. Got some great musicians. If you want to praise, it's a great place to do it. If you want to learn, it's not a great place to do it, unfortunately. It's tragic. It's terribly tragic. The problem is, though, there's no authority for anyone. If you decide, I don't want to keep these commands, I'm going to find a less stringent fellowship, then they say, hey, we're keeping these commands. You probably ought to do this with us or go somewhere else. Well, you can just go somewhere else, right down the street. There's 5 other places that you can go, and you'll find one that fits a little bit better with your style, fits a little bit better with your interpretation. It's a little challenging. It's a little challenging. What's that?
Tickling the ears.
They're just tickling the ears. That's a great way to look at it. So we are stuck in a bit of a conundrum here, and I want to share this passage with you. I know that you probably have thought about this, but I want to share it with you because I think it's relevant here. This is from Matthew chapter 23. Okay, you know this passage. It says here, then Yeshua said to the crowds and to his disciples, the experts in the Torah and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. Therefore, pay attention to what they tell you and do it. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they teach. They tie up heavy loads, hard to carry, and put them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to even lift a finger to move them. They do their deeds to be seen by people. So, how are we supposed to interpret this? Is Yeshua, Jesus, here telling us that we should follow rabbinic Judaism?
No.
You might get that impression. Now, here's the challenge. Rabbinic Judaism of today, when did they codify or write down their laws? Anybody know? When the Talmud and the Mishnah was starting to be compiled? It's about 250, 300 AD. So 200 years at least after Yeshua died. So unfortunately, what that means for us is these rulings that many Jews read today in the Mishnah and the Talmud and the Tosefta were written after Jesus was on the planet. So does anybody see a problem with that? The problem is that Yeshua was often at odds with the religious leaders of his day. And so he agreed with them on a good number of things, and he disagreed with them on certain other things. So we can't have a totally clear picture of what the Judaism of his day really was. It's a little bit challenging to discover because we don't have any writings that go back that far. The oldest writings we have are from 300, 350 AD. So these are rules and rulings that came about after Yeshua, so we don't know exactly what he would say about them. But we do know about the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the rabbis and the lawyers and the scribes of his day, what he did agree with them and disagree with them about, at least some of it. Does anybody know, for example, something that Yeshua would have disagreed with the religious leaders of his day about? Fasting? Yeah, there's a good one. And you can also see, and this is a good example too, that the disciples would argue with the scribes and the Pharisees, and even religious Pharisees who had converted to belief in Yeshua as the Messiah had a plan to get these Gentiles to start doing things our way.
Circumcision.
Yeah, circumcision, absolutely. Giving it korban, yes, about and dishonoring your parents thereby. So Here's how you can lump those together, and I think this is probably a good idea, and I'm just taking the words from Yeshua himself. You have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in favor of your own traditions. Right? The takanot of the Pharisees. Absolutely. So, what is a tradition? Because Yeshua, when Yeshua was having his disciples, he doesn't necessarily say that his disciples, he were instructed by him to do so, but they were hungry and they were walking through the grain fields and they plucked heads of grains and rubbed it in their hands and blew the chaff away and to feed themselves. And what did the Pharisees say?
Should be gleaning on the Sabbath.
Yeah. Now, is that work? Is it work to thresh wheat on Shabbat? Well, theoretically, yes, like Jerry is saying here. If you had a field and you got out there with a sickle and you're chopping down grain and threshing, working your threshing floor on Shabbat, yeah, you probably ought to not do that. That's work.
But there's nothing wrong with eating a snack, though.
But feeding yourself.
Went to David and said, look at what David did. He ate the showbread. So maybe there was some validity what they're saying, but there's the principle of life over everything else. So.
Exactly. Now, and I would say this, Brett, that's a good observation. However, it doesn't say that they were starving to death. And I mean, it's only 24-hour period. These people are fasting all the time, so it's unlikely that they were on the edge of death and they needed to feed themselves. What Yeshua, I think, was telling them is, and this is a good thing to think about, okay, I get it. You shouldn't be out there threshing. That's your job, to thresh wheat. If you're a farmer, you got to thresh your wheat. Don't do that on Shabbat. But can I make myself a meal? Come on. Shabbat was made for man, not man for Shabbat. You got it flipped around on its head. What is that telling me about Yeshua's interpretation of a Sabbath commandment? Don't be so stringent. You don't need to worry about flipping on light switches. You don't need to worry about, going crazy like that. The Shabbat was made for you to relax. If you want to be kind to your wife, don't ever make you a big fancy meal. Have her make you something simple. Give this guy a mic. Give Malky a mic. What's up, buddy? Tell me what's on your heart.
It just kind of makes me say some crazy things sometimes. And we were at a Chabad.
Yeah.
And I told the rabbi, I said that, that the eating of the wheat is, if he's guilty of that, then you're guilty every grape that you're plucking off of the stem.
Right.
Because you're literally plucking grapes, aren't you?
Right.
To eat.
Yep.
And I said, if he's going to be judged that way, he's going to judge you this way too. So
That's
be
right.
careful how you judge.
100%. 100%. Great insight. Thank you, Malky. So, right. So what I am suggesting to you is we need to be under authority. We really do. Now remember, I'm not telling you that you need to be under my authority. What I would suggest the best that you can do is you need to study to understand who is your authority figure. Who is your authority figure? It should be Yeshua. He is the chief rabbi, for sure. For sure. However,
Or your husband if you're married.
or yes, thank you, Brett. Okay, or your husband if you're married, or your father if you are underage, or a young woman living at home. Okay, Father has set up an authority structure. He absolutely has. Okay, now you know that we had a Jerusalem council in Acts chapter 15, right? Where James and the other disciples were figuring out how we're going to put the Torah commandments onto the Gentiles who are coming in and don't have any idea about our way of doing things. They're likely to come to church, I brought a roasted pig. I got some good stuff here to share with everybody. I brought my homosexual lover. We're all good to go. We're going to party down. It's going to be awesome. Okay, so they have to figure out, okay, whoa, guys. Do you notice the 4 instructions that they gave them were things that were rampant in the Roman Empire. Look, man, no, you can't come into our fellowship with sexual immorality. You can't eat unclean things in our fellowship. You can't bring idolatrous practices into our fellowship. But now that you get rid of that stuff, you can come in and learn the rest of the instructions. Notice they said, because Moshe is taught in the synagogue every Sabbath day. So this is like, hey, let's start with this baseline level. Now, who made that ruling? James did, Yeshua's brother. Now, why didn't that decision get made by the Sanhedrin? Right? I mean, who's the ruling authority on the planet at that time, at least according to anybody who's a Hebrew? It's the Sanhedrin. Well, do you think the Sanhedrin already had rules for proselytes coming in? You bet they did. You bet they did. And yet the disciples determined, yeah, we're not going to let those people make rules for us. I wonder why. Because they were followers of Yeshua, and they were, by the power of the Spirit and by the following of the Master, they had learned to distinguish. They had learned to be righteous judges themselves, so that they could say, and I think that this is the power of the Spirit in the life of the believer. Not that you can do what's right in your own eyes, because these two are often confused. But the Spirit of Father will teach you if you will just open your book. You know, that's one of the things, and you read John chapter 14 through 17, where Yeshua is spending a lot of time talking about the movement of the Spirit and what his purpose is. He says explicitly that it is to teach you. He will teach you and bring to your remembrance the things that I said, so that you can interpret the Scriptures according to the truth, so that you'll be able to read these commandments and judge for yourself. Judge for yourself. Not using your own wisdom, but you will have the Spirit in you that will teach you. But I think, unfortunately, this is the problem. Laziness. We're lazy. We don't want to read it for ourselves. It's so much easier to sit over there and have some guy up here tell you what to think. That's why I have always said to you, do not believe what I tell you. Look it up. I might be an idiot. I might be lying to you. Look up what I'm telling you. Research it. That's how you can protect yourself. And you can call me out sometimes too. You can say, you know what, Alan, I don't think you're right about what you said. Cool. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. I'm correctable, I hope. If I'm not, I should be very, very mindful of that. I should be very careful of that. So, do we obey rabbinic law? No, we don't. No, we don't. Are we lawless? No, we're not. We have to be very, very careful about that. We have to be very careful about that. What time is it? Am I going long? Am I getting long-winded? Mike, am I getting long-winded? You just give me the thumbs down, buddy, and I'll wrap this puppy up. Is it okay? All right, good job. All right, here we go. Doing a little bit more. Doing a little bit more. I want you to, we're going to talk just briefly about the angel of Yah and the promises of God that are attached to these commandments. I want to have you open up your Bible one more time. We're going to be looking at Exodus 23, starting in verse 20. Exodus 23 and 20. I want to just read this little passage for you and just chat about this for just a moment. In regards to authority, I want to just bring something to your attention before I move on to this next subject. I mentioned how we have a real problem with authority, and we're kind of a rebellious people. I want you to remember one thing. If a man or a woman in the house speaks lashon hara, evil speech, about people in positions of authority, they revile and disrespect authority in their homes, what do you think their children will learn? They will also disrespect authority. Have you ever wondered why you can watch the weirdest stuff I've ever seen in my life with people getting pulled over by the cops and deciding to argue and fight and start throwing blows with police officers? And you wonder, like, and they're puffing out their chest and going, yeah, what are you talking about? You ain't got no authority over me. That is a good way to get beat, and rightly so. Unfortunately, when we denigrate authority, we teach our children the same. They become like animals. No one can tell them what to do. They're useless in a civil society. If they don't recognize how to understand and respect authority, tremendous damage is done. So, do not revile authority in front of your children. It's a dangerous, dangerous tactic. It'll actually backfire because they'll start to question your authority when they see you don't recognize authority. Should I recognize your authority? They won't. Be careful with that. Now, I want to read for you this little passage here. It says, I am going to send an angel, my messenger, before you to protect you on the way and bring you to the place that I had prepared. Be attentive to him and listen to his voice. Do not defy him, because he will not forgive your acts of rebellion, for my name is in him. But if you will carefully obey and do everything I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and a foe to your foes. For my messenger will go before you and bring you to the land of the ites, and I will wipe them out. You must not bow down to their gods or worship them. Do not imitate their practices. Instead, demolish them and smash their sacred pillars to pieces. Worship Yah your Elohim, and he will bless your bread and your water. I will remove illnesses from you. No woman will miscarry or be childless in your land. I will give you the full number of your days. I will cause the people ahead of you to feel terror and thrown into confusion, all the nations that you come to. I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you and retreat. So, fascinating little nugget here regarding, this is a very mysterious passage regarding this angel of Yah, the messenger, this mysterious messenger. If you've read Chazal, does anybody know what Chazal is? That's what they call the rabbis of old. Okay? If you've read any of the rabbis of old about this passage especially, it's quite fascinating. They say that this angel here is a very special angel, and they call him Metatron. Have you heard that before? It's a very mysterious authority figure in Judaism called Metatron. It sounds like a transformer. It's very strange. But they call it not Megatron, Metatron. You know what? Actually, we're not even sure what it means. Some people think it's a weird translation of the word mediator. Not sure.
It means after the throne.
Yes.
In Greek means after and then throno.
Yes. So yeah, it's a fascinating study. And you know what? In Judaism, if you look at Metatron, there are some passages from the Babylonian Talmud that suggest that Metatron is almost like a demigod that is like equal with Yahovah. I'm like, man, if you ever had a case to make of a pre-incarnate Messiah on the scene, it's fascinating. I don't want to go too deep in that. It's amazing. It's very interesting stuff. Yes, Gracie, you have a microphone? Talking to it.
What does after the throne mean?
After the throne? That's a good question.
It means he's closest to the throne.
Means he's closest to the throne.
He's the closest one that knows it.
The highest authority figure among,
Like Joseph.
like Joseph and Pharaoh. It would be a good way to look at it. Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's why Pharaoh and Joseph is such an interesting picture of the Messiah Yeshua, because it's I will still rule by the throne, but in all other areas you're in charge. So it's almost like the Hebrews recognize that Metatron, this angel of Adonai, is a very mysterious creature. Very mysterious. Interesting stuff. My name is in him, and it's just very, very weird. But I just thought I would throw that out to you. It's a fascinating thing. Now, point I want to make here is we have some promises made. We have some promises made, okay? Just looking right on here, he says, you will get your enemies defeated in battle. Okay, that's awesome. He says, your water and your bread. Well, how do you interpret that? It says, he will bless your bread and your water. I think an easy way to interpret that is your crops will flourish. Pests will not eat your grain so that you can make bread. I will also bring rain from heaven to water your crops so that they grow. So we have And this is a huge thing in the ancient days, where this is why they worshipped all these gods, because they wanted their children to be healthy. They wanted their wives to give birth. They wanted their calves to birth. They wanted their crops to grow. They wanted rain to come down from the sky. This is why they prayed to all these gods. Fertility. You know how many fertility gods there were in the ancient world? Almost all of them had some aspect of fertility. So God says, I will defeat your enemies in battle. I will bring you water from the sky and make your crops grow. The removal of illness, disease removed from you, fruitfulness of childbearing, and long life. Give you fullness of days. Now, great question. Great question. Hold on to that, because I'm coming to that in just a second. He said, is that heaven? Great question. Now, we have quite a powerful list of promises here. These promises are also repeated in Deuteronomy 27 and 28, right? The curses come immediately thereafter, but they are also repeated in more detail in Deuteronomy 27 and 28. So take a look at that as well. But I had the question here is, these are powerful promises. How do you get these promises? And as Mark said, is this the kingdom of heaven? We'll talk about that in just a moment. How do we get these promises fulfilled? And is it right for us to think that we can have this type of blessing in the temporal, in daily life now? Is that possible? It's a great question that is really, really important, because unfortunately, I think we have learned, and why wouldn't we have, since Christianity told us for so many generations, these instructions from the Old Testament don't have anything to do with you. Your blessing will come in the resurrection, and that's undoubtedly true. But if you disconnect God's people from his commands, which come with curses and blessings, then you might be under the impression, well, the curses and the blessings are gone too. I don't have to worry about that stuff. I'm not so sure that's true. Okay, so the question remains, as Mark said, well, does that only happen to us in the resurrection or in the kingdom of heaven? It's a great question. But let's set that aside for just a moment. How do we get these promises? Does this passage give us any hints about how we might appropriate to ourselves these promises, if it is possible for us to live like this? What does it say? It says, right at the beginning of this passage, it says, be attentive to the messenger of Yehovah and listen to his voice. Do not defy him, because he will not forgive your acts of rebellion. Doesn't say he won't forgive your sins. It says he will not forgive your acts of rebellion. That's fascinating. For my name is in him. So be attentive and listen to the voice of the messenger of Yah, whatever that is, if it's Metatron. Some people think that this is a reference to Moses. Some people think Christians interpret this to be a precognition about Yeshua. And I think all of the above are true. Is the spirit of the Messiah in this messenger? Yes. Is it Moses? Is Moses a messenger of God? Absolutely. Is Yeshua a messenger of God? Absolutely. Someone hand that young man a microphone. Thank you, Steve.
I was thinking maybe this is the Holy Spirit.
Interesting.
Because it says, do not defy him, because he will not forgive your acts of rebellion. Now, acts of rebellion and sin seem like the same thing to me. I don't really think there might be a distinction between those. So you could be talking about blasphemy of the Holy Spirit.
That's an interesting way that you put that. Blaspheming the Holy Spirit. That's an interesting insight. I appreciate you bringing that up, because many people will talk about how in Judaism, willful rebellion has no sacrifice. That's an interesting argument. I've heard that many times, and I think it may even be true. I'm not 100% on that. That's a contentious issue. Cece, what do you got for me, sister?
I just have a question. How does this relate to us if we're not in the land of Israel? Is
Excellent.
it because this is his land, period, or?
Okay, that's a great question as well. And I'll ask you a question in relation to your question. Is God the God of only that plot of land? Or do his rules apply anywhere and everywhere?
I think his rules apply any and everywhere. It's just for verse 23, it says, my angel will go before you and bring you to the land. So I didn't know if it was a particular land. Like, I think we should obey him no matter what land we're
Sure.
in. But you know,
And
if
I-
this was a reference to something that
Yes.
he was written into.
I think you make a good point, Cece, and I would say yes, it is absolutely true that this instruction is specifically given to the people who are about to physically, literally enter this land. However, I think we often do ourselves a disservice by thinking to ourselves, well, those commands are really only applicable to those people at that time who are entering the land. Because that leads me to believe that God is not the God over this place and that place and this place and that place. He's only ruling over this people in this place. And that I don't believe. Unfortunately, Judaism does teach that in a lot of ways because they have the Noahide laws for the Gentiles. You guys go and do those rules. We're better than you. We have better rules. We got to do the right stuff. You guys can go, do whatever you want. You got to obey these basic rules. We got the real stuff. Now, when I mentioned before Mishpatim versus Leviticus, we got a holiness code here. If it's right for the goose, it's right for the gander. God does not give. If I adopted a redheaded stepchild into my family and I said, okay, now I got certain rules for these kids over here. These are my natural born kids. I'm not expecting much from you. Okay? You don't have to do all this stuff. That is going to be all kinds of problems. Okay? My natural born kids are going to be like, why are you treating him? Why does he get off? What's going on here? And this person's going to be saying, no, God does not show favoritism. He's not a respecter of persons, right? We know that. So if he gives a set of rules to anyone at any time, it is applicable to everyone at all times in any land. That is my supposition to you, because our Father doesn't change and his rules don't apply randomly in certain specifics. I cannot believe that. I cannot believe that. Cece, and then Jerry.
As I know, sometimes people use this against us when, like, it comes to like the sacrifices and things of that sort. And so that's why I was curious. I'm actually also curious on what Daniel did when he wasn't in the land of Israel and what Joseph did when he was in the land of Egypt. Because that does come up, like, do you do the sacrifices? Do you do this? And then a lot of people will respond like, no, we don't do it because we're not in that land, or we don't have a temple and things of that sort. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you make a good case there, because you look at Daniel, for example. Do you notice the times of day when he would do his prayers at 9 a.m. and noon and 3 p.m. every day? Those are the times of the temple sacrifices. He lost his ability to offer sacrifice in the temple. And so he made do, because he read in the Psalms that my prayers are like incense going up before the throne. That's what I'll do, because I can't offer a sacrifice. I'll do the next best thing. I'll do the best I can. I know that I'm supposed to keep this command, but God has taken away my ability to fulfill it. What can I do to show him that I have a heart to do it in spite of the fact that he's taken it away from me? Now, Christians are going to choke on this in a big way, because you're going to say, wait a minute, sacrifices? Have you read the book of Ezekiel? It is, in my opinion, that there is going to be a temple in the millennium, and there are going to be sacrifices. But Yeshua is the final sacrifice for Yom Kippur.
Hebrews 13 as well.
Right. So that's a contested issue. I will maybe tackle that with you in private. But Jerry,
Can I ask one thing?
do you have a microphone?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So like the word is Pesha, rebellion, and it says 23:21, and what you just mentioned, Yom Kippur is a time twisting of truth is corporately and individually
Dealt with, yeah.
dealt with, yeah.
Yeah, that's the one that causes me trouble when people say there's no sacrifice for willful rebellion.
They're talking about the mid-Ramah, the high-handedness.
Yes.
When they left.
When they left Egypt, you saw that, yeah.
Purposefully did that with a high hand,
Right,
not ever intending to go back to that lifestyle. of sin.
right, right,
And that's the high-handed, after you've been called out,
right.
and you high-handedly go back into that sin lifestyle, kind of like whooping it up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Jerry and then Malky, you want to say something? Give it to Jerry. Go ahead,
I
Jerry.
was going to say, back when they were at Sinai,
Yeah.
God said to them, Moses said to them, we have one God, we have one law. If you want to be part of us, we will graft you in, and you can become an Israelite. But you are under the Torah.
I think that's a
whether you
true
like it or
statement.
not.
That's a true
And
statement, Jerry.
to me, that's the same thing today when we get saved,
Yeah.
when we become a child of Christ. We are grafted into the royal
lineage, the royal priesthood.
royal lineage of Israel,
Yeah.
anyways.
Good insight.
And, I feel that if I'm part of Israel, then just like when somebody grafts himself into the United States, they're under our Constitution.
Right.
Israel's Constitution is the Torah.
And
So
that can
puts me
apply
out of the
to
Torah, whether I like it or
that
not.
can apply to you no matter where you are.
Yeah.
Unless there are certain things that you cannot do in this society because it's not permissible. And we must obey the laws of the land where we are.
Correct,
Unless
correct.
Father has told us, you must do this, and our government tells us you must not do that, we have to disobey our government. Or if Father says, you must not do that, and our government says you must do that, well, we're going to have to disobey our government. Sorry. You can kill me if you want to. I'm just going to have to go ahead and say, no, can't do it. Sorry. All right, now I'm coming to bring microphone over to Malky for me. Malky, tell me what's on your heart, brother.
Yeah, I'm not a Bible scholar, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but isn't somebody supposed to come and raise the tabernacle?
Yes, that's a matter of who, though. I assume Messiah. I believe Messiah. I mean,
Could
but
it
that's
be
highly
Eliyahu?
contentious.
Maybe he was given the priesthood for
Did you say who?
Eliyahu, possibly?
Oh, yes, Elijah. That is very possible. Very possible.
But just raising the tabernacle, wasn't that done in the desert?
Mm-hmm.
And were they doing sacrifices at that time?
Yeah,
So it didn't say we're going to raise up the temple.
right.
It said raise up the tabernacle.
Yeah.
I see this as another exodus coming out of Babylon, out
Excellent.
of the nations. And we're going to start doing Passover so that people understand that
Yep.
it's actually, we're supposed to do it forever.
Yes.
And you see the spirit of, I've done it every year since 2014, and you see his spirit actually
Yep.
in the whole thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because
Good
it literally
insight.
gives itself to you,
Good insight.
and you eat it.
Yep. Good
And it's,
insight.
But anyway,
Love it. Yeah.
Tabernacle, it's back in the desert again.
Right.
And all the things like we were in the desert until we get home. Then there's the temple.
Good insight. Good insight. Excellent. Excellent. Carla, you have come close. What's up? Oh, it's Daryl.
This
Sorry.
isn't Carla. This isn't Carla.
What's up, Daryl?
Just to get back to your comment earlier, we're reminded time and time again through all the scriptures that we are to be obedient. The blessings come from obedience.
Yes.
And that's why I think we're reminded that we're supposed to say the Shema every morning and every evening to hear and obey.
Right.
That's what God wants from us. And if we're obedient to what he tells us, the blessings will follow. And I mean, that's just the basic foundation of what Torah is all about. It's hearing and obeying. And that's why we should do the Shema morning and evening.
Excellent. Excellent. Amen. Thank you for sharing, Daryl. Sir Seal.
Amen.
I promise, it's my last question.
It's okay.
When we talk about the blessing and the curses, like, are we cursed as a whole? Like, whatever my sisters and brothers do, I also suffer from that? Or are we cursed as individuals? I have often been, or is it both? Like, I have often been confused about that.
Yeah, that's a great question, Cece, and I will simply tell you my opinion about this, and I will say this. Can you suffer from the curse coming upon you by the sin of someone else? 100%. If I violate the law to such a degree that they throw me in prison, okay, is my family going to suffer? Yeah, in a big way. Okay, so yes, you can suffer due to the sins of people around you, most specifically your parents. Most specifically your parents. Okay, so now here's the second part of that equation. Are you living in a land polluted by sin entirely? Yes. Is this blessings and cursings corporate or individual? Yes. Both. Absolutely. Both. Now, so are you saying, Alan, that you can experience blessings of bread and water and the removal of illness and fruitfulness and childbirth and a long life if you obey the commands of God, if you're obedient to Him? I didn't say it. He did. Do you believe Him? I do. I do. And I will point this out. And this is the last thing I'll say on this, because this is going to open up a can of worms, and you're all going to shoot your hands up in the air, and I'm going to pretend that you're stretching. Many of us experience death and disease and the curses. And most of the ones that I have seen in my life, we do to ourselves. We do to ourselves. Now, I understand that there are exceptions. That you might say, I have a disease because it's genetically passed down. I get it. We're living in a corrupted world. Maybe our parents did something. I don't know. But in a lot of cases, in most cases, we bring it on ourselves. If I eat things that aren't clean, probably going to hurt myself. If I do drugs, probably going to hurt myself. If I smoke, probably going to hurt myself. If I don't exercise and I sit around, probably going to hurt myself. Okay? You see what I'm saying? We hurt ourselves way more than we are hurt by things around us over which we have little control. That's just my experience and the experience of many of the people that I talk to in my life. But I do recognize that there are things over which you have no control. But I do believe, and this is the final word that I will speak, search your hearts, search your scriptures, pray to our Father. I do believe that you can bring great blessing on yourself. Is this related to the millennial kingdom? Absolutely it is. When great blessings pour forth. Can we experience those now? Yes, I believe we can. I really believe we can. If we're willing to follow our Father with all of our hearts and obey Him with all of our hearts, we can bring great blessings to ourselves and our children and the people around us. And we should seek to do so as much as we possibly can. Amen? Let us pray.